Thank you, Professor Sher, for the very flattering introduction. Thank you also, Professor Deng and the government of Suzhou for inviting me. I'm very, very honored to speak to all of you today. I'm not sure if I'm the qualified person to do it, but I can tell you that I have been both in academics and in industry. So I'll just share my perspective coming from both sides of the world. And you may be wondering, why is this person who looks Indian, who's worked in America for 30 years, speaking on Singapore? But I'll tell you something, I was born and brought up in Malaysia, and Malaysia is right next door to Singapore. And that's at the age of 17 for Boston and New York. And then come back to Singapore after 30 years, and I've seen the progress that Singapore has made from the time I was growing up in this area, particularly in the area of financial development. And I think one of the things that I hope to leave behind is, especially given that I was just a small young boy from a small town in Malaysia, I was able to fulfill my dreams and work not just as a professor in America, but also as a practitioner, that all of us can think big and be somebody, especially in developing and improving the financial environment in where we live. And I hope that's what we can take away from that. I'm not an expert, it's just more observations of what I've seen over the years, and then sharing some of the best practices that I've learned by working in industry and in academics. So let me get started here. I apologize, I don't speak Mandarin, but I presume you can understand through the translation that's going on. So I'm going to go through the ingredients that Singapore has, I would say, successfully implemented or shall I say, gone through over the years that partly explains its success. It's not perfect, but there are a lot of things that I think we all can learn from, and I'm just going to share it from this point of view. First of all, it's critical that for any country to develop, that it has to have a very good economic policy, both monetary, fiscal, regulatory, and enforcement ability, and education, coupled with education. I think from all of our experience in China, we pay a lot of attention, the country government pays a lot of attention to all these things, especially education. So I'm just probably preaching to the choir here in terms of that. But at the same time, there are still good elements that we can learn from different parts of the world that we can incorporate into our own environment as well. And that's what I hope to share with you. There's also this whole idea of improving productivity. Technology incorporated into the workplace, whether it's in finance or in engineering or in manufacturing, technology certainly improves productivity improvements, which means also that we have to constantly reinvent ourselves and re-educate ourselves and affiliate ourselves with all kinds of learning opportunities to improve our human capital. And Singapore has been quite successful in doing that. Up to this day, the government's always very worried about being left behind, about people not being up to par in terms of their skills and so on. So right now there's a big initiative called the Smart Nation Future Economy that's going on in Singapore, where all kinds of educational incentives, all kinds of financial incentives are afforded, and tax incentives afforded, such that you can grow in that environment. And finally, despite all what you hear in America with the new president-elect, cross-border trade and investment is very important. That cannot be neglected. Academic research has shown that. Our own lives have shown it. Cross-border free trade, foreign direct investments, inward and outwards, are critical to a country's development and the global environment and economic development. And infrastructure plays a critical part in a nation's investment and growth. And I'm very excited about what's happening in the infrastructure space. Actually, I'm very happy there's a representative from AIIB here, because I think that's a game changer in terms of how we do things in the infrastructure side. A second part is the efficiency by which state-owned enterprises and institutions have to be run. I'll share with you some of the observations I have on the government-linked companies in Singapore. and these are the topics that I'll be covering. Rule of law, prudent consultative regulations. You cannot have jumps in your process in which you regulate, because that scares away investors, that scares away foreign and local investors. So it
方式啊，他就比较了解，所以说大家也因他在手术的过程中跟他的一些感受。
I think you're over the mic system. Okay. Anyway, so basically, prudent regulations are also important. We may be having interference from another conference call. Okay, I'll just keep going. Can I just keep going? Yeah?
Because she cannot hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Oh. So how should we do this? 1 minute? Okay.
Is that okay? It's okay now.
It's okay now. Okay, good. An aging population and demographic. That's the other thing that's affecting Asians. China, Singapore, Korea, Japan, many countries are suffering from the aging demographic. So we have to worry about how we save up for retirement and handle the retirement problem. I personally believe, I served on the Singapore government's retirement panel for the last 2 years, and I believe a lot of the retirement financing problems can be solved in many of these countries. And I'll share with you some of these issues. Not just from the point of view of saving up more. I think people have saved enough in Asia. Asians are known for saving a lot. It's just a matter of tweaking our philosophy and the way in which we monetize what we own. I think it can solve a lot of our retirement problems. And then there's infrastructure. I think we hear a lot more about that from the AIB representative. I'm a big believer in infrastructure because it always leads to development. That's good for the nation. It leads to productivity improvements, and it's good for trade. But that said, infrastructure is also one of the most difficult areas in which to work in, because sometimes there's lack of expertise upstream, sometimes there's a lack of expertise or financing structures downstream. So we've got to be careful how we do infrastructure. I'll share a bit about that as well. And finally, fund management. I think Suzhou, I heard Suzhou is a big capital market environment here now, the 4th largest, if I'm not mistaken, after Shanghai, Shenzhen, and so basically I think there's a huge opportunity in the fund management ecosystem as well. And lastly, on technology. So let me just go down one by one. Government policy. I'm going to just share with you how one person can make a difference. I hope all of you believe that you can make a difference. Whether you work for Goldman Sachs or you work for a small bank, it doesn't matter. I think you can always make a difference, either as an institution or as a person. And I can share with you Singapore. I've been an ardent watcher of Singapore's history. Because since I grew up when Malaysia and Singapore was one country, when I was born, Malaysia and Singapore was one country. And then they separated. So we used to be an ardent watcher. My whole family used to be half in Singapore, half in Malaysia. So we know the countries very well. There's one person who made a dramatic change to Singapore's economic and financial environment. I'm going to tell you what he did. He was the one who got the group of people together in London to talk about independence. Secondly, he's the one who developed Economic Development Board. For those who have not been to Singapore or read about Singapore, the EDB is the one that attracts foreign capital into Singapore. And it's been very successful back in 1961. DBS, I'm not sure if DBS has a presence in Suzhou, but it's a pretty big bank. It's the largest bank in Southeast Asia. The Jurong Industrial Park, which was eventually became JTC Corporation, which is one of the biggest developers of industrial infrastructure in Singapore and around the region. He was instrumental in founding MES, the central bank, the reserves management program, and the outsourcing of that monies. That means like how now you have reserves money being managed by CIC and SAFE in China. In Singapore, back in the 70s, they started giving money out to fund managers and all that to get a higher yield with a long-term perspective. was very unique in those days. There were very, very few government reserve agencies that were doing that, giving money to the private sector to manage the funds for them with a long-term perspective to get a higher yield. It's a bit more risky, but still, with a long-term perspective, with good proper controls and oversight, and with the good asset allocation policy, you will hopefully achieve the long-term returns that is better than just sticking to bonds, for example. He overhauled the education system, and he was one of the few analysts who predicted that China would be very successful by the 1990s. Very few people had thought China would be the success it is today, but he predicted that back in the 60s. And then he was named to be an economic advisor to Deng Xiaoping, to China by Mr. Deng Xiaoping. Anyone knows who this person is? You want to take a chance? Malacca. Malacca is where Cheng He, do you know Cheng He? Admiral Cheng He. He visited my hometown in the 15th century. Many times, 6 times. He visited Malacca 6 times. And Dr. Goh was born in Malacca. Anyway, a bit of promotion about my own town. China has a lot of good things going on right now. So I'm going to switch from Singapore to China to show what a success China has been. I also am an observer of China because we had a lot of relations with China from the 80s. I used to come and teach here, and then when I was working at Credit Suisse and Bank of America, we used to come here. My wife also was in Beijing for 6 months on work assignments, and so we've got a lot of relations with China, and we've watched the country grow. My first visit to China was in 1994. There were still so many bicycles in Shanghai. I came to Shanghai, stayed at Pudong. Pudong was still not developed. I stayed at the Shangri-La. That time it was the Shangri-La in Pudong. I forget what hotel it is now, but those days it was called the Shangri-La. And basically there were so many bicycles in Shanghai. I couldn't believe it, 94. And then when I came back 5 years later, the rest is history. How it has developed and transformed. A lot of it is through trade. A lot of it is through finance. And a lot of it happening within Asia now. If you look at trade finance, most of the trade finance, I think I read somewhere, it was about 50 to 60% of trade finance between Asia and China is now taking place in non-US dollar currency, which is a very important development. It could be renminbi or another currency that's not US dollar. The SWIFT, you may know this results, but I was at a panel where the SWIFT people were present, and they told me this renminbi is the fastest growing. It's still small in terms of international payments. It's still very small, 2.03%. The dollar is the biggest. Then it's British pound or euro, and then yen, and then renminbi. But still, it is a very fast-growing currency for settlement. And now it's becoming more and more of an international currency. It's part of the special drawing rights of the IMF. And at some point, I would presume it'll be a reserve currency, a real free floating reserve currency at some point. Maybe not now, not ready for it now. There are a lot of other things they have to do, but at some point it will be a free floating currency. Belt and Road, you know about the infrastructure project, why the AIB was set up. Now ICBC is doing a private AIB. It's a Central East European fund that will support infrastructure development in the Central Eastern European countries. The former chairman of ICBC spoke in Singapore, and I heard him talking about the development of that fund. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in Belt and Road, but still there's a lot of work to be done. How do you get these things to be a bit more properly structured? And the role of finance. There's a lot of financing opportunities that has to be done right so that you can bring the providers of capital and the demanders of capital together. And that's our role to make that happen. I'll give you one example from the IFC, which I saw 2 weeks ago in Hong Kong. I was moderating a panel, and the IFC was there, and they shared an example which I think is a brilliant example. I hope more infrastructure banks will follow that example, and I'll show you the financing structure. And the fintech capitals, Shenzhen and Hangzhou are the fintech capitals of the world. The reason I say that is because in terms of capital raised, it is the largest in the world. There's about $10 billion raised in Asia. $10 billion raised for fintech in Asia. $10 billion US dollars. year to date. America only raised 5 billion. Silicon Valley, New York, 5 billion, close to 5 billion. Asia raised 10 billion. 90% of that 10 billion came from Shenzhen and Hangzhou, money raised. That's a lot of money raised for fintech. And I know my wife serves on the board of some companies in Shenzhen, fintech companies. A lot of very smart people in Shenzhen. I'm sure they are in Suzhou as well, but I know from her that Shenzhen has got an incredible ecosystem for fintech development. Efficiently run state-owned enterprises. Temasek, GIC, the Reserves Management Group of the MAS. I know these people personally, and I know that they run them just like a corporate would. So you have to separate government from corporations. So the way Singapore did it was they set up this government or investment companies that are wholly owned by the government, but they're given full latitude to run it based on commercial principles, as a shareholder, stakeholder, and as an owner. Okay? So it's no different from a shareholder of a publicly listed company. They follow the same principles, best practices, ESG, environment, social, governance. They follow all the same principles as a publicly listed company does, but it's still owned by the government. The government enforces regulations, does the policies, and makes sure that if there's wrongdoing, it will step in and prosecute the wrongdoing. So I think what Singapore has done quite well is to separate the two functions. Even though it's all part of the government, the policy making versus the commercial enterprise. That's what I think explains Singapore's success in terms of Temasek, GIC, and all those government-linked corporations. I won't go into the details. There's somebody here from GIC himself who can probably tell you more about it. But the fact of the matter is there's meritocracy, there's accountability, and this whole focus of operating an ESG framework and within the laws of whichever country you operate in. And if you don't obey the laws in South America, you will be prosecuted for it. Okay, so that's the way it goes. The companies that Temasek has spun off over the years are household names: Singapore Airlines, Singtel, Keppel, DBS, CapitaLand. These were all part of the government that was slowly, just like your state-owned enterprise models, that was slowly released into public hands. And the government still owns probably a large chunk through these government-linked corporations of these companies, of the shares of these companies, but it's got a public diffused ownership structure as well, which always is good to improve governance and all the other good stuff that come with commercially run enterprises. It was not always like this. Singapore, this is a poster that I got from a very old writing of Singapore. In the 19th century, the problems faced by the British who were ruling Singapore at that time, was law and order. There was abuse of immigrants, they called them coolies are laborers. There was females forced into vice. Parts of Singapore swampland and vice filled. And there's piracy. You could not have free trade. The boats couldn't come in and out freely. Okay? That's what the pirates, you can see that I have got a little pirate, I don't know if you can see that, but that's supposed to be the pirate boat. My best picture of a pirate boat. But what Singapore has done since is that they tell you there are some rules. Here's the sandbox in which you can play. Here are the rules. So anything you work in, or any area you work in, financial industry, manufacturing, science and technology, whatever area, education, there's some rules. Clear rules that are transparent. Sometimes they're a bit silly. I'll tell you, as someone who's living in Singapore, some of the rules are silly, but there's a reason why they are there. Okay? Like this example, I don't know if you all know this. They have rules for how you can ride bicycles and motorbikes, the electric bikes. Where you can ride, where you cannot ride. It's from the government. They even tell you where you can ride. And you better believe it. If you don't ride according to that, the policeman will give you a ticket. Okay? So from a country with no laws, no piracy, it has come to even how you ride your bicycle, there are rules. And there's, of course, now bigger police presence, and the same rules apply to MAS. They have rules about the monetary authority, which is also the regulator, have rules about how you can operate in terms of private banking, in terms of asset management. And recently, many of you may have heard about BSI. There was a bank that was stopped from operating. Its license to operate in Singapore was cancelled. A private bank, because of some wrongdoing among its employees. So the employees became pirates, and the government shut it down. So they also act very fast and hard on the people who break the law. So they shut the bank down. It's quite a famous bank, private bank from Switzerland, and it was shut down. So you've got to also enforce the law fairly and effectively. So let me go through some of the areas. I talk about housing. I'm not going to go into all the details. 80% of Singaporeans live in housing, in the housing development, public housing. They're very clean, very sanitary. From a swampland, it's become into a very nice, that's not really a housing development, that's another property in Singapore. But you know, you get the idea. It's basically well-run, well-managed estates where you have self-sufficient restaurants and parks and places that kids can play and so on. So Housing Development Board has done a very good job in providing housing. It's very important that citizens have a roof over their head. But what has happened is because they own the house, they also have equity in the house. Those values of the house have gone up. And that's one of the points I'm going to bring up later. For retirement, you have a big part of your wealth tied up in the house. I don't have the statistics for China, how many people in China own homes, but I do know that a lot of Chinese, especially the young ones, aspire to own their own home. And that's a good thing. A good thing because you have a roof over your head, and secondly, because if worse comes to worse, push comes to shove, you have a monetizable asset that can be used for retirement or for other purposes, including if you want to start a new business, you'll be able to monetize. That either takes the government or the private sector or a combination of both. In Singapore, the government plays a large part in monetizing the housing. But in America, it's the private sector. It's the banks. So I don't know about China, what the opportunities are, but at least there's a way in which you can provide products that help you monetize people's housing. And they're called reverse mortgages, lease buyback schemes, and so on. The other thing is about retirement. There are three things that make you sufficiently equipped for retirement. You have to save enough, you have to invest wisely, you should be flexible about your human capital, that means you should be willing to work longer. In America, in 2007, many of my friends, older friends, wanted to retire. They wanted to retire in 5 years' time. And then 2008, the crisis happened. Their retirement wealth dropped a lot because their financial advisors told them, don't worry, you're retiring in 5 years, keep it in equity mutual funds. Keep it in equity mutual funds. And then when 2008 came, those equity mutual funds, we know the global financial crisis, got wiped out. So a lot of them lost money. But in America, they're very willing to work later, more. So what they did was they deferred their retirement. Because they lost a lot of money, they just deferred later. So there's human capital flexibility in your retirement as well, which is basically to work longer. And the third way is unlocking asset values. And I use housing as one big way in which the financial sector and the government can help either through a private-public partnership or purely private sector initiative to help people unlock values for retirement. So those are the three ways. Save up and invest safely, unlock real estate values, and third, be flexible about your human capital. That means be willing to work longer. If we follow these three principles, most of Asia's retirement finance woes are over. The problems that we talk about are over. At least 70% are over. At least in Singapore, because Singaporeans, a lot of them own their homes. Same in Malaysia, and I believe in Korea also. Many people own their homes. The problem is in America, the reason why reverse mortgages didn't work was because the fees were very high. The fees charged by the banks were extremely high. So I think there's also a duty we have to play, not to be too greedy, and make sure that it's a reasonable fee. If not, the government has to step in, one or the other. But it solves a real problem. This is to me the perfect financial product for retirement. And this is what the CPF in Singapore, the Central Provident Fund, like your NCSSF, National Council for Social Security Fund, we have a CPF, Central Provident Fund. This is the perfect product. When I retire, the government provides a safety net through what's called a life annuity, provided by the government, charged by the government, very low fees, guaranteed by the government for life. I get a fixed income once I retire, and then anything else I can put into private sector and earn more. But the important thing is, there's a safety net. This is what I call the safety net. Every month, I'm guaranteed, let's say 8,000 renminbi per month. I'm guaranteed by the government in a life annuity until I die. If I want more, I put it into the private sector. So to me, this is the perfect retirement product. Safety first, and then take on risk. So I hope China will also offer some kind of products that look like this to ensure safety and peace of mind for retirees as well. Here's the Belt and Road Show. So I was telling you that I spoke at I was a moderator at a pensions forum in Hong Kong, about 3 weeks ago in Hong Kong. And basically, all the top pension funds from America, Middle East, Australia, Asia were there. The AIB was there as well. One of the board members, International Advisory Board members was there in the room. I moderated the panel. And one of the participants who came up and spoke provided the structure which I thought was really brilliant. Basically, a lot of people want to invest in infrastructure. They want to provide capital and participate in infrastructure. Whether it's greenfield, brownfield, late stage, it doesn't matter. But you need somebody who understands and who knows enough about infrastructure, whether it's from the government or people who are experts in infrastructure development. The IFC, which is a part of the World Bank, does the due diligence. They will invest in a portfolio of infrastructure projects. It's not much, it's a small, the IFC manages about 10 billion. It's a very small entity. But yet, the idea was a good one. They provide the loans, they provide the financing through these infrastructure projects, through the World Bank capital or whatever, but then they syndicate it, they securitize it into a product called the MCPP. And then what happens, that's a fund structure. It's a fund structure. Maybe it's a Cayman fund or a Dublin fund, whatever the case may be, or a Luxembourg fund. And then asset owners, like pension funds, insurance companies, and others, high net worth investors, can buy units into this fund. And the beauty of this program is the government of Sweden guarantees the fund. There's a credit enhancement. So the government of Sweden said, look, instead of giving money to Africa, giving money to Asia, and the money disappearing through aid, we will provide the aid through a guarantee. So if you invest in Indonesia, the IFC puts money in Indonesia, we will guarantee if anything happens in the failure part. That's a credit enhancement. And now the asset owners from America want to invest in the IFC fund in Asia, Africa, and so on, because there's this guarantee. You see what I'm saying? To me, this is the first innovation I've seen. Maybe there are others in the world, but this is the first time I was seeing this, and I encourage everyone in the room to do more of this stuff, including the AIB. These kind of structures can allow a more diffused ownership and participation in infrastructure. So that's one thing I want to leave behind. I'll be happy to send you the picture and the term sheet. I have the term sheet. I'll be happy to send it to you if you're interested to look at that. The other thing is the fund management industry. Let me just ask you, how much more time do I have? 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. So let me tell a bit about the fund management industry. Singapore and Hong Kong are two large fund management centers in Asia. When I say large, it may not be just size, but respected. That means when an American fund manager wants to come up with a domicile for their fund management operations in Asia, you think of Hong Kong or Singapore as the first place. But it took a lot of work in terms of regulatory structure, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technology, and financing that allowed Singapore to grow. So the first thing they did was to change the rules to allow fund management domiciling in Singapore, the vehicle structure, like a mutual fund structure. So previously Singapore and Hong Kong had trust structures. Unit trusts are not very tax efficient. They're very limited in terms of how you can pass through the benefits and so on. So basically what they did was they created, just like in the US and Luxembourg and Dublin, an open-ended investment company structure. Hong Kong, I think, already passed it. Singapore is going to pass it as of 2017. So that you don't need, if you're managing money in Singapore and raising money in Asia, You don't need to have a Cayman fund or a Luxembourg fund. You can have a Singapore fund or a Hong Kong fund. And I think this is a big benefit. And Singapore stands at an advantage because it's got the most number of tax treaties with countries internationally. I think it's the second largest of the largest in terms of tax treaties. So tax treaties are very important for this kind of structure to be successful, and that's why Luxembourg is successful, that's why Dublin is successful as fund domiciles, because of tax treaties they have with various countries. So Singapore stands a good chance because it's got, I think, over 100 tax treaty nations that will benefit from this kind of structure. So they have created that legal structure to be established by 2017. They also have a very strong focus on back office. It's one thing to say you want fund managers to be there, but if you have a horrible back office administration system, fund accounting system, nobody wants to be in the country. So you need to have a very strong backbone for fund management. And for that, you need also education. The Singapore government tied up with Nanyang Polytechnic, it's a polytechnic in Singapore, to offer a diploma in fund management administration. These are students who are trained to manage the back office of a fund of a fund manager, to do the accounting, reconciliation, trade, ticket pricing and stuff like that. So it's very important to create the ecosystem. MAS, the central bank, has just announced, the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, who is the chairman of MAS, just announced a new external fund management program. They're going to farm up more money or give more money to external managers to encourage them to come to Singapore. So it's a combination of government and private sector. So more money to help them, attract them to Singapore and set up their office in Singapore. So right now, BlackRock, all the big funds, BlackRock, Dimensional, Morgan Stanley, most of them have got their fund management operations in Singapore. They also have presence in Hong Kong, but the larger part of them are based in Singapore. Another private-public partnership, Temasek, remember I told you the government-linked corporation or investor, Temasek and a private hedge fund, completely private hedge fund called Diamond Asia, managed by Singaporeans. It's now probably the largest hedge fund in Asia. It has about $5 to $6 billion in assets. Both of them have partnered to create an ecosystem where managers can come to Singapore and flourish in the hedge fund space. So the way it works is Temasek and Diamond puts up money, $100 million, $50 million, to the hedge fund manager, tells them, you come to Singapore, you manage the money out of Singapore, we'll provide the infrastructure and the financing. So you don't have to do any risk management, you don't have to do any distribution, you don't have to do any selling, you don't have to do any fund administration or back office stuff. We will do it for you. You just manage the money. You just do the technical expertise, and we'll provide capital as well, $100 million, $50 million. So it's a new program that was started by Temasek and Diamond Asia. They put close to $750 million jointly into this project for fundraising and so on. So again, it's all about an ecosystem. And it's not for friends and family. You must pass the high hurdle rate in terms of the fund ability. Now, I know Institute of Real Estate Studies has got a world-class real estate center. They are part of the whole ecosystem. But I run a center for asset management, which was again done with the government. I came from New York, because I'm from Malaysia, I came from New York, and the government asked me, would you like to come to Singapore and be closer to your family? I said, absolutely. But I said, I would like to build a training center in asset management, because that's my expertise. The government said, let's do it. The Ministry of Finance, MAS, EDB, the Economic Development Board, and the Ministry of Education involved, together jointly with NUS, and we set up the center for asset management to train future fund managers. So that's another thing that's very important as well. And lastly, let me talk about the future economy. Singapore is seeing a lot of growth. Although Shenzhen and Hangzhou are the capitals of fintech fundraising, Singapore has a lot of initiatives and funding provided to the future economy. They want the entire nation to be smart. And it's amazing to see how the government executes. They've got programs from education to financial structures to tax incentives, all kinds of systems coordinated so that every Singaporean and corporations can take advantage of technology in finance, in insurance, in healthcare. The big thing right now is healthcare. Everyone talks about fintech. But health tech is more important, I think. Very few people are doing things in healthcare. The back office administration, the middle office, to reduce costs, intermediation costs, and to make doctors more efficient. I think there's a huge opportunity of health tech. In New York, in Silicon Valley, in Shenzhen, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, everyone I talk to, they talk about fintech, fintech, fintech. Very few people talk about health tech. So I hope there'll be more resources and funding provided in that area as well. So Singapore has a whole bunch of innovation labs, and in fact, many of the banks, I don't know if there are any Chinese banks, but many of the global banks like UOB, Citigroup, MetLife, HSBC, UBS, MasterCard, and IBM Watson Center have set up innovation or incubation labs in Singapore to do hackathons, to develop technology in their particular industry. The problem I see in Shenzhen, in Silicon Valley, in Hangzhou, is that technology is great. The people are very smart from computer science and technology. But what's lacking is subject matter expertise. When I say subject matter expertise, that means domain knowledge. People from finance working with the people from technology to make a successful product. So that's what I see lacking. It's not just Shenzhen, it's also lacking in Silicon Valley. I see a lot of people doing fintech, but very little involvement for the financial industry. I think for the fintech product to be successful, whether it's robo-advisors or e-payment systems, you need to have both parties sitting at the table together. And that's why I'm very excited about UBS and IBM and MasterCard and HSBC doing fintech innovation labs in Singapore. I think that's the right way forward. So, so that was my point in red. You're data rich, you're technology savvy, but you are knowledge poor. And I say this as a criticism because I myself have been approached by many fintech firms in Singapore, in New York, to serve on their board. And I say, no, I'm not going to serve on your board because a lot of them are computer science people, well-intentioned, very smart, but they have very little finance knowledge. And I don't want to waste my time. I say, you bring me a finance guy on your team who knows what robo-advisor is about, what payment systems are about, then I will help you grow. So I think that's the other opportunity. And the other thing in Hong Kong, when I was there, that came up was Mr. Charles Lee. I don't know if you all know him. He's the Hong Kong Stock Exchange CEO. He talked about Shanghai Connect and Shenzhen Connect. So maybe one day there'll be a Suzhou Connect. You know, where trading between Shenzhen, Shanghai, southbound and northbound trading takes place. And that has really grown the market. I'm not sure how big the Suzhou capital market is, but maybe someday there'll be Suzhou Hong Kong Connect as well, so that your market also can grow and the financial sector can develop. But anyway, that's what Mr. Charles Lee is doing at Hong Kong Stock Exchange is quite phenomenal. And from what I understand, he's actually from mainland China. He was born here. So that's my presentation. I hope I stayed within the limit. Perfect. Okay. And with that, let me hand it back to Brendan. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude, for sharing with us Singapore's experience on the financial management. We still have a few minutes. I guess Professor Cherian would be happy to answer some of the questions audience may have. Now we open to the question from the floor. Any questions?
Yeah, don't be shy. Ask me any question you want.
Well, you can ask questions in Chinese.
Yes.
No problem. We have the translator.
Thanks for your presentation. I think you touched on the aging problem. Yeah, at the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about the aging. Actually, yes, this is a very global concern. Japan is already facing it. I think Singapore will be facing this problem in 5 to 10 years. China maybe 15 years. So what is your advice to China, to the Chinese government in coping with the aging problem? In terms of your policies in population control and the retirement.
Right.
What is your comments and advice? Thanks.
Okay, so the first thing is to take care of those who are aging, right? To make sure they have enough for their retirement. So maybe China started the retirement savings program a bit later, or if they have a pension system that's available, that should take care of most of the needs of the aging population. But the problem is now the replacement generation, the younger generation coming to take over the economy and all that. I think China has a problem there, and that's what you're saying about the 15-year problem. But that said, I've read that the Chinese government recently is allowing more children in certain parts. Am I correct about that? That they're allowing more children. So first of all, the first step is you have to allow people, you need to have more children. Then you also, the second thing is to attract more talent back. I think China has been very good at that. You may not realize this, but no other country, not Japan, not India, not Europe, has been able to attract talented people back to their home country. I think China is one of the most successful in getting Chinese who are trained overseas to come back. From America, I have a lot of friends of mine, from Credit Suisse, from Wall Street, Morgan Stanley, who came back. That's the second thing. Then the third thing is you have to have a bit more labor flexibility. Maybe selectively allow people to come in through work permits and so on to take on jobs. So that's a prescription out here. But at the same time, we have to also take care of those who are retiring, not just worry about the younger generation. There must be safeguards in place to ensure that if people have not saved enough for retirement, that you have policies that allow people to have enough for retirement, either through a pension system, or if they own their homes, allow them to monetize it. Make it very cheap for them. I don't know how many Chinese own their homes. I don't have that number with me. Maybe the IRIS will know that number. But the fact of the matter is, if they own the homes, make it cheap and easy for them to monetize their home for their retirement needs, so they don't live in destitute when they retire. Yes.
OK， 中国随着这个金融市场的发展和一些金融体系的这个发展，也出现了许多对新的金融产品的这个需求，比如说在房地产开发领域，原来是靠土地财政，现在提了很多像房地产投资信托 REITs 这一类的产品，但是问题卡在哪里呢？卡在那些许多监管部门，包括这个中国这个税务总局，这个他不肯让税，因为在国外，美国或者新加坡 ，REITs 一个关键的重要的一个部分就是说避免双重征税。关于这个企业税这一部分免了，因为它90%的收入要分给这个 REITs 的股权的拥有者，但是中国的税务总局说这个税我不能让。你在你的经验当中，在国外是不是也有遇到类似的这个问题？而在国外是在怎么解决这些问题？比如说有些政府他希望这个产品出来，但是在某些关键的监管或者管制方面，他又不肯让步，国外是怎么解决的
？Okay, that's a very good question. Part of the reason I think that there is no harmonization of tax regimes and financial market regimes is because of lack of education. They don't understand the full aspect and how everyone can benefit. That actually, even though 90% of the income is given back, tax advantage program in the REIT structure in America and Singapore, that the overall economy benefits as well. So sometimes I think it's more of education. America has its own problems. In the pension side as well, the products also have a lot of problems from regulations and taxation point of view. Like some are tax deferred, not completely tax advantage. So we have our issues as well. But I find that when the local government, the municipalities, the central government, the tax bureau all work together in a unified way, it tends, and in an educated way, well-informed way. Sometimes I find in America, like when we were something what's called the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, when we offer a product, the Securities and Exchange Commission may come and question us why we do that product. And when I talk to them, I realize they're lawyers. They're not finance people. They don't understand the product. Nothing wrong with lawyers. It's just that you've got to educate them. Why is it we're offering it and how the society can benefit from it? So the SEC means well, the Securities and Exchange Commission means well, but they're not educated to understand the financial product. So it's our job, especially at universities and centers, to do things like this that help them understand why this is beneficial. I think at the end of the day, every government wants to do good. They want their citizens to live happily, to grow, to prosper, and increase their wealth levels. So I think it's just more of a conversation and dialogue. And believe me, it's not just China. America also still has a lot of unresolved problems in the financial sector. Singapore is a bit more harmonized. The reason because it's a small country. The government, everyone talks to each other, small country, easier to manage. But America and China, that's a good comparison. And I can tell you, America has not solved all its problems when it comes to offering financial products. There are still a lot of loopholes and a lot of frictions that can be removed, in my opinion, that hasn't been removed. So again, it takes collective cooperation and education. And that's why I feel the centers and institutes have a very key role to play in bringing the parties together.
Okay, Joe, maybe I'll ask you in English.
English? Okay.
I think it's very interesting to hear about your questions about this open-end investment company framework to be established in 2017. Can you elaborate a little bit more about this compared to the current trustee structure? You were saying that this is a more efficient way of raising funds.
Okay. So the open-ended investment structure is no different from the SEC 40 Act funds, mutual funds you have in America. So they are huge shares that you own just like a company under the Companies Act, as opposed to trust, which is under a Trust Act. So that means if the other countries agree to allow this, that's called passporting, then they can also invest into the Singapore structure instead of the UCITS. UCITS is now the structure, the fund that people in Singapore and Hong Kong offer, because that's passported for the region, and that's a Luxembourg-based structure. So we can move operations from Luxembourg to Singapore or Hong Kong. That means administration, everything can move over here. And the benefit of that is that it also grows jobs. More jobs, better for the economy, instead of sending it to Europe. Yeah.
I guess we have a final question. I would like to give the opportunity to the audience. Second row onward.
Central Europe. So I haven't seen any interbank institution in Asia. So my question is, how will Chinese financial institutions can cooperate with Singapore institutions under this Belt and Road Executive Framework? What's your proposal on this cooperation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. First of all, let me emphasize that Singapore was one of the first signatories to the AIB Charter. In fact, when they launched, so Singapore was a key player. When China invited the country, Singapore was one of the first that came in. And Singapore was so important that they signed I forget what they call it, the charter in Singapore. The Permanent Secretary of China and the Permanent of Ministry of Finance and the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Finance in Singapore signed it in Singapore. So I think Singapore is a very important player and a big believer in this process. Secondly, Singapore wants to play an active role. You can see it from the government. They want to provide the special purpose vehicles, the financial structures I showed you earlier. They want to be the home where these innovations can take place. So if you're a bank and you have a subsidiary structure in Singapore, I'm sure you can find ways in which to work with the government to provide the correct vehicles, like the IFC vehicle I showed you, which is very creative, with the credit enhancement. Because people are very worried about credit enhancement when it comes to infrastructure. So what is the government? Political risk is high. You're putting money in Pakistan, in Kazakhstan, in Indonesia, I mean, many countries where the credit risk can be high, the political risk can be high. So you want some form of credit enhancement. So bringing the parties, the private sector, the multilateral bank, like the AIB or the BRIC bank, along with the private sector is very important. And then you get the capital in as well. Now, that said, I do want to mention that right now, there's a lot of investment. I saw in Pakistan, they're doing highways and train roads and all that stuff. I don't know if it's the AIB or it's a Silk Road Fund. Somebody is building a lot of roads in Pakistan already. Malaysia and Singapore is building a high-speed rail. I think China stands a big chance because the Prime Minister of Malaysia was here recently in Beijing talking about the rail and all that stuff, riding on the high-speed rail. My sense is China stands a big chance in winning some of those projects. Indonesia, same thing. They just won the Jakarta-Bandung express train bid. They won it over the Japanese. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. But the problem is, how do you finance? Because some of these countries don't even know how they're going to finance it. Maybe there'll be some AIB loans, but that's not enough. We're talking multi-billions of dollars. And that's where I feel the banks in China should also participate. Not just the ICBCs and the Bank of China. I'm thinking about all the smaller banks can also participate. Especially when I went to the World City Summit organized by Professor Yong Hen, I was asked to panel at a forum. One of the things that came up during the discussions at the World City Summit in Singapore, that was what last, because a small team from the old days built this niche in the swap market. And they are now the leading player in the swap market. A second-tier bank beats Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan in New York and London in this particular swap market. I forget what the derivative market was, I apologize, but I'm just saying that maybe we shouldn't focus on the big projects, but the smaller ones that also need help, that need credit enhancement. That's where I think we should focus our efforts on. If, say, you're a smaller bank or a regional bank, and that's where I would leave it at.
Well, I guess I received a signal from somewhere, and time is up. If you have questions, so we can discuss about it later. Let's put hands together to thank Professor Cherian again for the interesting talk.
Thank you.